Welcome back to the If I Knew You Better podcast. I'm Brendan Davis, and I really appreciate you joining me today. This is a very special episode for me to share with you, and it's even more special personally for me to record it because I'm talking today with someone whose work I've admired for many years and who has also written about this and shared much of his knowledge with the world. And he is continuing to teach and educate and bring up future generations. And we will have a lot to talk about. I will include links to things we discuss. But today, my guest is director Mr. JOHN Badham. John, it's really a pleasure to meet you.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's exciting to be here and visit with everybody who's listening.
Thank you so much. Well, I'd like to start by just asking you to please give a brief self-introduction with what you would like to share with people to give us kind of context, the short version of where you're from and sort of, you know, just the overarching career. But we'll get into some details and such.
Well, let's see. I mean, I could start that I was born in England and came over after World War II with my mother, who had remarried an American Air Force general who brought us over to, of all places, Alabama. What a culture shock that was.
Yes.
But one of the good things was that when my stepfather went to college, he had gone to Yale, and thanks to that, I was able to somehow sneak my way in. I don't think I would have gotten in otherwise. But being from Alabama, they're always looking for geographical diversity, among other things, and so when I was there, I got very interested in theater and acting at first, and went to the Yale Drama School. But I graduated from there not as an actor, but as a director, because I found out that I was a terrible actor. But I was not so bad in the directing department.
I'm glad I learned that lesson myself too at an early enough age.
Yes, before committing my life to a difficult task. So I learned so much about theater from working with actors, with playwrights at the drama school, and then got an insane idea that I wanted to work in film and maybe television, and it was inspired because my sister starred with Gregory Peck in To Kill a Mockingbird.
That is so amazing. Yeah.
Out of Alabama, they came through. They were doing casting there all over the country. They picked her. She was in the movie, and my interest was tweaked. There I am at the drama school eating dog food, a scholarship, typical starving student story. And there's my sister starring in a movie with Gregory Peck. And I go, oh, no. Can I kill myself now? Oh, dear.
It gave you something to look forward to, though, possibly.
Yes.
Like making the films.
Like making the film. So she came back to Hollywood to do an episode of Twilight Zone, and I got to come out with her and watch all of this and absolutely said, oh, this is terrific. So I made a trek out after I had after I had done my Army duty, because at that point we were just getting into Vietnam, and I had to do National Guard Army duty. So I came to California, and with my 2 degrees from Yale, where I found nobody was the least bit interested in having me do anything, including pumping gas or being a page at NBC. So I just, worked really hard, and finally, with a little help from Gregory Peck, managed to get a slot in the mailroom at Universal.
Oh, he helped you out through this connection to your sister.
Yeah,
that's
and so there I am in the mailroom and looking at, what am I really going to do? The thought of directing was just like impossible. Looking at the top of Mount Everest, and you're standing at the bottom with no help at all.
Right.
But I kept working through the Universal system and became a tour guide, and then I was a casting director, and eventually tied up with directors and producers who started to have me working as their assistant, and one actually, William Sackheim, let me start directing after I had been working for him for a couple of years.
Is he the director of Daniel Sackheim, the TV director?
He's Daniel Sackheim's dad.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
So Daniel and I are still good friends, and have kind of come up together in a way. So I started directing television there at Universal, and was nominated for a couple of Emmy Awards for shows that Bill Sackheim was connected with, and that got me into my first movie, which was with Richard Pryor and James Earl Jones and Billy D. Williams, with the unwieldy title of The Bingo Long Traveling All-Stars and Motor Kings. Stop to breathe.
That looks good on the poster, though, right?
Yeah. Oh, it is. It's a great fun movie, and we shot it in Georgia in the middle of the summer. Took an entire black baseball team to Georgia in the middle 70s.
Wow.
And actually, it wasn't too bad. It was pretty good. Everybody behaved themselves, and we had a good time. There were, in the course of that movie, which was connected with Motown, there were some musical numbers of the team. As they would attract people to the baseball park, they would do, they would parade through town, and it was done to music and stuff like that. Some good Motown music. That, of interest of all things, got me connected with the producer of Grease and Saturday Night Fever, who wanted me to direct another film he had in mind. And when he lost his director of Saturday Night Fever, John Avildsen, I got a call. Wow. Would I come? And so I took over that movie like 3 weeks before shooting.
No kidding. I didn't realize it was that tight. I mean, I read your book, but I don't think I noted that detail, or maybe that wasn't in that book, but I didn't realize that. Wow.
It was pretty tight, and it was tight because John had to finish it so that he could start Grease, because they only had Olivia Newton-John for a certain window.
Oh, right. Mm-hmm.
And her concert schedule had been arranged for that, and those things.
She had a hard out, and you had to make sure to hit it.
That's right. So they had to start. So this all happened to work in my favor.
Yeah.
And a lot of 4 or 5 years of doing television, I was used to working on tight schedules, and had been thinking about musicals for quite a while, and studying musicals. So it seemed to be an accidental perfect fit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
So, after that, a lot of movies that I could bore everybody with.
I'll definitely ask you about some of them specifically, but that's probably an awesome jumping off point to sort of get into some of these. And what's great is that in your introduction you sort of address several things I was already going to ask, and in particular, sort of from the beginning days, was how that your family background influenced your worldviews and ideas about your career, and of course from your sister, it sort of helped show you. How would you contextualize it? For me, I would think that it essentially showed that, this is a world, glamorous though it is, or seemingly inaccessible. People do it. It's a job. People can go do it. I mean, was there something? Was that sort of that revelation when you're at Yale and you see your sister starring with Gregory Peck and realizing that help made it accessible, like something that could be attained?
I mean, I had a lot of skills that were related to that, and had worked a lot in theater, and was just trying to think, where am I going to go for the rest of my life? Am I going to try to take up residence in New York and try to, become a director there in theater? Or am I going to try to go to regional theater, to the Guthrie Theater, or the theater in Princeton, regional theaters? Or am I going to become a teacher all those kind of decisions. And this one sounded, like a really fun idea. Uh, the idea of working in film, even though it was probably no more impossible than the other ideas that I had.
Yeah. Yeah.
It just this was the one I was going to pursue, and then I'm sitting out here in Hollywood for weeks and weeks turning into months, looking for some kind of a job, any kind of a job, and wondering, oh my God, was this a terrible mistake, or
Yes.
how's this going to work out?
Right. Well, speaking of Saturday Night Fever, I won't ask you to go through your entire filmography and do war stories, but I do want to pick a few specific things, and I'll let you know that as I was preparing for our conversation, because we've had a couple of weeks now to schedule and get situated, I talked to several other film and TV professional friends, and a few of whom I think somebody across my friend Jonathan London. Was in a directing program at the studio, and he saw you direct an episode of Supernatural or something. I have several people who kind of worked with you in different contexts, and everyone said hello and wouldn't know if you would remember them, but to a person, people were very pleased with the experience working with you. It was really nice. No one had a crossword to say. Everyone's very excited to hear this. And one of the things that was asked, you indicated this a bit, was for you, what are some of the primary differences between, how TV training prepared you for film? And you mentioned that because of having to come in last minute on Saturday Night Fever, 3 weeks, you jumped onto a moving train. So it's people who don't work in this industry are understanding. Normally, how much time would a director have in that situation? Let's give people some context.
Well, actually, you probably would have been involved with it for several months before that.
Right.
And once they got serious about production, they would get you involved to where you might actually get paid, 8 to 10 weeks beforehand.
Right.
That's a normal feature production kind of schedule versus 7 or 8 days for a television episode, a 1-hour television episode. Mm-hmm. But in that 8 weeks, you have a lot of chance to nail down locations, get your casting going, get your crew assembled, and working with your DP and art director and all the keys and wardrobe and so on. So that's a normal kind of thing. But coming into Saturday Night Fever, we actually had one actor. We had John Travolta, and we had no locations. We had a lot of possible locations, but nothing had been nailed down.
3 weeks out. And 3 weeks out, you did
3 weeks out.
Wow.
No, that's
a little terrifying.
But as I say, I'm used to doing movies of the week.
Yeah.
At that point, and working pretty fast. And in New York City, they had already assembled a really good crew.
That makes a huge difference. They were,
huge help.
Yeah.
I went to no end of discos. And usually you'd have to go at 2 a.m. because they didn't get good till, middle of the night.
Right.
You couldn't wander in there at 3 p.m.
Sure.
Because there would be nothing
Not
there.
a lot to see. See the people cleaning up, basically.
But interviewing actors, we put so many actors in who didn't have Screen Actors Guild cards at the time. Most of Travolta's gang and girlfriends we put them in the Screen Actors Guild to start with. So he was our big star, and at the time, my friends thought, oh, the guy from Welcome Back, Kotter.
Right.
Oh, that must be Gabe Kaplan. No, it's this kid over here on the left with the shaggy hair.
Yeah.
The goofy kid.
Yeah.
Yeah, Barbarino.
My dad had a
Oh,
weird overlap with Gabe Kaplan. Apparently, he gave me a baby rattle as a baby gift, but I don't remember because I was pretty small.
oh,
But so I had this
there,
weird little awareness. I mean, I loved Welcome Back, Kotter as a kid. I was born in '68 to kind of carbon date me, but
6 degrees of separation, Kevin Bacon, and
yeah,
all
oh
that.
yeah. Weirdly, we have a few others, which I won't bore the audience with. I'll tell you offline. But what was it like? I mean, that was one thing. You thankfully answered something I was going to ask you, which was I understood that it was a lot of first-time actors or non-professional actors, and I don't know if it was called Taft-Hartling, the people then, but basically where you hired them and then they get to join the guild, like you were saying. So you're working with a lot of less experienced or even non-professional actors. You've got this guy who's at the time a rising big star. What was it like? And I'm sure you've talked about this, so apologies, but I think we're getting for the sake of people listening, we're getting the emergency alerts telling us when the curfew is in Los Angeles.
That's right.
Yes.
That's exactly what we're getting.
Yeah, John and I are both getting the alert simultaneously. I leave things like that in, by the way. Okay, I mean, since it's
Okay.
we can quickly move on.
It's a time capsule.
It is, honestly, and I'm going to at the end of this, I'm going to ask you a little bit more philosophical. Doesn't even have to be film and TV related. I'm curious about your take on the state of things and what you hope for the future, et cetera. We'll get to that, but in terms, so I was starting to say, I was building up to ask, that was such a massive zeitgeisty film, and I was too young for it when it came out. It was not appropriate for me to see it, according to my mom, but I saw all the ads, of course, and she absolutely I had her make me a white leisure suit with the flared, with the bell bottoms. Yeah, no, there's some real blackmail material in my mom's catalog of photos of me, but yes, I had to have myself a Johnny T leisure suit and a fake gold chain, and it was the whole. I was in like suburbs of Atlanta at the time, so no connection to like New York or the culture. I'm not Italian. We're like Irish, But what was it like? Here's the actual question, John. What was it like to be part of such a zeitgeist exploding film? Because I mean, I don't have to butter your biscuit too much because you know what you made, you know what happened, you know what it did for your career. What was that like in the moment? I mean, can you even kind of relate it to those of us who haven't had and probably will never have that kind of an experience?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I really got it. It was exciting when nobody expected that it would do what it did, except maybe for Robert Stigwood, the producer.
Yeah.
Who was always optimistic, and you thought, well, you just wrote that off to producers. Yeah, they're always thinking the best.
I can relate to that. I'm no Robert Stigwood, but I can relate to that.
Yeah, and I'm talking to people in my crew, my editor, and things like this, saying, "Why are we releasing a movie about disco when it's dead?" At the time, disco was kind of just starting to fade.
Yeah.
And this was like a great shot of nerve tonic into the phenomenon of disco. I mean, it just came back alive from the music, which took off, from weeks before the movie was released.
Mm-hmm. Oh, the Bee Gees record was
various Bee Gees songs were already playing, starting with "How Deep Is Your Love," and then right before it went into "Staying Alive," right 2 weeks before release, so it was very much all over the airwaves at the time. And then when the first day it opened, critical to know, the early reviews from the Variety and a couple of places were terrible.
Okay.
They just absolutely hated the movie.
Did they just not get it, or were they offended? You know what I'm talking about.
They were offended.
Okay.
They were offended. Now the Hollywood Reporter was much kinder to it and thought that it was terrific fun. But the Daily Variety, which is the one that everybody took seriously at the time, basically said, "Well, this is not going to last the weekend." And Travolta is pretty good, but the rest of it is just kind of gross and crude and rude, and nobody's going to go for it. That that review got me fired from a picture at Fox.
Oh no!
That I was involved in, and suddenly they decided they didn't want to make that movie anymore. And
they didn't want to make it with you, or they didn't make it at all. Like they got scared that you.
They didn't want to make it with me, and then they decided they didn't want to make it at all.
Okay.
I think it wound up being made over at United Artists, but it was, so going into it, we were not expecting huge things, but the public was lined up. I mean, at the Village Theater, which, as you know, is one of the nicest theaters in LA, right next to the UCLA campus. The Village Theater was at 10 o'clock at night on opening night, was not only jammed full, but there was an audience waiting outside around the block.
Oh, wow. Nice.
For the 12 o'clock show.
Jeez.
Say.
Yeah, that's not unheard of. Well, it's unheard of in the moment, but prior to COVID-19, it's not unheard of for something to maybe have some late shows, but that wasn't even culturally such a big thing. The midnight movies were sort of like the exploitation. I mean, the midnight movies for people who are not my age or older, the midnight movies were typically more like, okay, now let's do this crazy, weird European horror film or something. It wasn't necessarily the popular film. So the fact that it's like a mainstream release and there's a sold out midnight crowd just waiting to get in is pretty telling that it captured the cultural spirit.
Yeah. When the grosses were reported on Monday morning, the theater grosses, you didn't get them instantly like you do now.
Right.
But you'd get kind of little checkups during the weekend. Well, when the Paramount executives saw the grosses on Monday morning, their first reaction was, "These are wrong. There's too many zeros here."
Wow. They expected decimal points of difference, not individual numbers.
That's right. Wow. They said, "Wait a second. These are all wrong. Somebody has added this up all wrong."
That's great.
And because it was universal across the country, and then they realized, oh my God, we have this big hit on our hands. The theater right by me in Studio City, which is a little neighborhood theater, ran this film for 6 months.
6 months. Yeah. And again, I remember as a kid that like a big hit film maybe was in the theater 6 weeks or 2 months sometimes, but 6 months was a monster hit.
We're coming in behind Star Wars, which had been running for long periods of time.
Yeah.
The first Star Wars. And we were actually kind of moving in and taking over those theaters because its run had ended.
Yeah.
Going out. So there, I'm just totally amazed at the kind of reaction to it. And I'm getting calls in the middle of the night from France, from French journalists. Now, mind you, I can barely say bonjour, and these people talking to me in French, wanting to know how to get a hold of John Travolta.
Oh, I thought they were trying to interview you. They're trying to use you to get to your star.
No, they didn't care about me. They didn't care a thing about me.
Oh, I mean, so obviously that's making an impression. I mean, were you sort of I imagine it was something like being in shock almost because it overperformed so wildly.
I think so. I mean, it was very exciting. Everybody was excited, and most of all, my agent was thrilled.
Sure.
Oh boy, here's this is just what we need.
They're lining up that next job for you.
Get something going, and let's pick something that that makes sense.
Right.
And this was a Paramount picture, but I still had a deal at Universal because I had been there from the beginning.
Right.
And by that point, I had been there for, 13, 14 years.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. between starting in the mailroom and then working my way up to doing TV and
Sure.
doing TV for quite a while. So there was a good future looking, getting to see a lot of movies and see something that I might like to make for the next thing.
Mm-hmm. And again, I promise not to take you. We don't have the time to go through the entire filmography. But what was the next one that you undertook? I'm not quite remembering the order of a few things earlier in your filmography.
Okay. Of course, I was asked by the Mirish Company, who was at Universal, to go to New York and see the terrific actor Frank Langella, who was starring on Broadway in a reboot of Dracula.
Right.
And they were doing the original Dracula play from 1924, the very same text, and doing it in a very campy style with the scenery by Edward Gorey. So it was all like,
no kidding,
all like looking at black and white drawings of scenery, like a bookcase, all as a black and white drawing. You'd see it on PBS, the Sunday Night Mystery, or Charles Addams. That kind of art direction.
Sure. Yeah, Gorey. And again, people who don't know necessarily, you know the work if you don't connect it to the name. I think it's very fair to say a huge influence on Tim Burton, for example.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, all these black and white pen and ink drawings that he had published in the New Yorker and all over the place. Well, that was the scenery for that. And so I went and I looked at it and I thought, well, I don't know, you could do this exact same concept as a film. But what you do have is you've got one of the sexiest, most romantic stars playing in this. A guy who has tremendous stage presence, sure. Frank Langella.
Gorgeous, full of charisma, great
gorgeous,
actor.
Great-looking guy. Physically as brave as Laurence Olivier was in his day as an actor. Wow. And that's something to say, not just a guy who speaks with a wonderful voice, but somebody who has great physicality and movement to him. So our plan with the Mirishes was, let's make this in England, and let's make it in the beautiful, the countryside of England, and on the coast of the North Sea, where he might come over from sure. Romania. Mm-hmm. We start with a ship landing in the middle of a violent storm, right. and disgorging a coffin onto the beach, where he's discovered. So that was our second film after, or it was the film right after Saturday Night Fever that we did, and we've actually just re-released a version of that was done, because I think of all the shows that I've gotten any acclaim for or awards for, that one has gotten me more over the past 30, 40 years, of various science fiction and fantasy festivals all across the world.
Your Dracula is the one that's probably got you the best notices overall.
Yes.
I have several friends who are I won't name drop for the sake of being a gentleman, but who are very much involved in kind of the current, horror world as filmmakers and writers, and many of them that film has come up many times as one of the films they like a lot. And one of my friends has his classic movie posters, and most of them are from like the films that are decades earlier, but he has that, like, he has a very specific, I mean, it's a one sheet that he bought that was in a theater. Right, he has a very nice frame with a little spotlight on that poster. And so I've, among my cohort of people who are really, know that genre and love that genre, that's a really beloved film. I'll ask you about one more specific film, because it kind of leads us, the question is going to lead us into the sort of the back end of the chat. And that is specifically War Games. And
Yes.
at the time you made it, can you tell people who have not, anyone, within 10, 15 years of me knows it very well, either direction. But can you kind of briefly tell people what was the setting in the world when that film was made? I mean, kind of the one line on the film and why it was so relevant when it was made. Because it was a very socially relevant film while also being like a fun popcorn action thriller, But it was wrapped up in this context. It was, you can't separate it from the context of the times that it was released, of course.
Well, just as an overall view, it's good to know that we were still involved in the Cold War with Russia,
Right.
and with China, and there was a lot of fear and superstition and bad blood going back and forth, and we were piling up nuclear warheads. They were piling up nuclear warheads, and the internet was just in its infancy under the auspices of what was then called the ARPANET,
Right.
a government research agency that was putting together the internet. And we meet a young guy who's like 14, 15 years old, played by Matthew Broderick, who's learning about computers, which are then, starting to come into life. I mean, nobody had a personal computer.
Right.
That was very unusual. And so here's Matthew Broderick, who has put together the crudest computer kind of thing that you could imagine, with giant CRT displays and big box computers that are, even for the time, were deliberately outdated, and old-fashioned modems where you actually took the receiver of the telephone and put it into
like
the
an
modem.
Acoustic coupling that actually listened like
Acoustic.
an ear. Yeah.
And accidentally, in his desire to get to play the new video games that were starting to come out, wanting to invade the Atari factory and see if he could play those games, he manages to log himself into the Defense Department's advanced warning system. And next thing you know, accidentally, he almost gets us on the brink of World War III, as we're getting ready to set off missiles. Russia's getting ready to set off missiles. And it's all due to this kid.
Yeah.
And therein is the concept of the movie.
Yeah. Well, my follow-on to that, and this was actually a question that several of my friends, it came up in different ways, but my version of it is, if you were remaking war games today, what would be the context? Like, if you were doing a reboot, and what do you think would be the how would you approach such a thing? I mean, of course, there are technology advances to be considered, but beyond sort of those things, I mean, in terms, do you think that it's something that actually is maybe ripe for a reboot in a way? Or would you may be horrified at the idea of anyone remaking your work? So I don't mean that it should be. I'm just saying, well, it's really more the sociological, geopolitical question, of course.
Well, obviously the world has come a long way, and not necessarily a good way, in all that time with the technology. And I was just reading in the last week about a young guy who managed to stop one of the worst viruses that had come around, that was literally going to crash computer systems all over the world.
Okay.
And here's like a young guy who's just sitting in his basement, not like Matthew Broderick, only a little bit older. And this is a real thing. I mean, this guy all by himself managed to stop this, a real horrible threat. Because, as you know, every system we have is so totally, including our washing machine.
Yeah, and the power grid and the dams and all that stuff
Yeah.
is all
I mean,
connected
your
in
toaster
ways.
your toaster is going to shut your house down.
Right, I don't trust the toaster.
I mean, everything is connected in ways never dreamt of back in 1983.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, why would you want your refrigerator to be connected to the internet?
Yeah.
And yet there we are, and our automobiles and everything like that. So the danger that we find ourselves in is quite scary, and there's definitely another movie to be made about it. This one was because of the innocence of the whole world,
Mm-hmm.
and looking at this brand new technology, and isn't it fun? It's exciting. Why, my gosh, you can actually make an airplane reservation
Right.
on here.
No one really understood it who was watching it. So we were discovering, the audience was learning things by watching Matthew's character.
Yeah,
He was our guide through this new world.
we didn't even have cell phones
Right.
at that point.
I think we had rotary phones at home. I don't think, did we have Touchtone? Yeah. I guess maybe Touchtone was coming in at that point.
Yes, that was coming in, but the closest thing you had to cell phones were these giant boxes that went in the trunk of your car, made by Motorola,
mm-hmm.
and you had to work through the mobile operator.
Mm-hmm.
You had to get an operator on the phone and tell her, "Here's the number I need you to call."
Yeah.
As you're driving your car around. So, what a different world we're in, and what a scary kind of thing it is. I mean, this kind of a scary movie has been made a lot. I'm thinking of Tony Scott's Enemy of the People.
Oh, one of my favorite. Yeah, love that film.
So many of his films are
Man on Fire,
underappreciated. Man on Fire, Unstoppable,
20 times. Yeah. Great films.
Yep.
Great films.
These are just scary kind of films. We miss him a lot.
I imagine you would have known him, but I miss having his work and his voice out there too. Speaking of that, actually, I can't have you all day, unfortunately, because I could easily talk to you for 3 hours, and I probably got about 10 or 12 minutes. But I am curious on sort of that note. You have been fortunate to see and be part of a lot of changes in Hollywood and ride various waves and be part of these certain zeitgeisty films, also like Stakeout and Short Circuit. And I'll put the link to your filmography, of course, in the show notes so people can realize, oh, he did that too. Like all these things that people are aware of, and they just may not. I mean, some of them know you as the person behind the film, and some of them, they may be surprised that you also did this. What do you think of some of the changes you've seen sort of more recently, especially in Hollywood? I mean, technological advances are great. We mentioned as we got on the phone, I'm wearing a cap for the digital IMAX camera that you understood what that was. So there's certain things we have that are just mind-blowing compared to even the options a decade ago. But in terms of, I'm thinking more in terms of creative and cultural changes in Hollywood. I'm just curious for your thoughts on that.
Well, one, aside from the technical, the digital revolution, I mean, one of the contributing things to not just going, from film to digital, but our computer explosion into various devices has been that our entertainment and our films are spreading all over these devices. Mm-hmm. And what was the leader of the entertainment business for many years, motion pictures, has now blended so that the line between motion pictures and television has almost completely vanished.
Right. Yeah, feature directors who are hired for pilots, very typically. Not uncommon.
We're seeing it, and at Chapman, where I teach, we're in the process of abandoning the television division because it's all merging.
Oh, okay, interesting. I mean,
It's
I agree
it's all
with that, but it's
becoming
interesting that
one. It's not
they're
just
doing away with it.
here's TV over here and here's movies over here.
Right.
It's all the same thing. The storytelling ideas, the creativity are, well, it could go from a 3-hour movie to down to Quibi,
Right,
or
right. 10 minutes
YouTube.
versus director's
But
cut of Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, the storytelling principles are the same.
Right.
It's just they're condensed. I mean, even if you're talking about 30-second commercials.
Sure, you got a beginning, middle, and end. You still got 3 acts. It's just they're just short acts.
You have conflict and various storytelling, and so we're in the process of seeing how we can merge all of this so that we don't have first and second class citizens of this world, that we're seeing wonderful films on various devices, not just our television screen, and our younger audiences are perfectly happy to be staring at their little iPhone.
Sure. Well, the screen, though they're small, they are super high resolution, and you can really see, you can see quality and color, and you have to zoom in for detail, but you can see an image with integrity. It's just very shrunk down. If it's right in front of your face, it's basically as large as if you're sitting in a movie theater in the middle row, I guess.
And yet at the same time, people are, we're social critters by nature, and we like to get out of the house. Mm-hmm. We like to get, go to the movie theater for event type of things. So there'll always be a place for that, and room for it. But as we have been seeing for quite a while, it's so much more event based. Going to the theater, we're going to see the latest, Star Wars, Mission Impossible, whatever the event is, right. And we're not going to see the small personal dramas. Yeah. It's been going this way for a long time.
Sure,
it's just kind of, the small movie theaters that run the foreign films are the ones that are having the most trouble staying alive.
Right. Well,
because those products are all popping up with Netflix and now Universal and Disney and all of these. Everybody's jumping on the streaming bandwagon.
Right. Well, the and again, apologies to the audience. There are a few little Skype hiccups where then we think someone stopped and then I start talking. So apologies for that. But I mentioned to you offline that last 4 years I've been living in Beijing, and going to the movies with my girlfriend, the 4D experience is a very big thing for those kinds of, like we saw the Jumanji sequel in 4D, where it's in like the seat that's got the dynamic motion, and there's wind and there's mist and there's, they have heat and they have cold that blow. And it's so the rightification of that sort of big event, action, adventure type of a thing. It seems like that's a direction that's going. And then it's a little disconcerting, like you were saying, like the art house films are I mean, they're going to find an audience, but there also has to be a business model that works. I mean, we have to raise money, even if it's a small film. I mean, somebody like me or you has to figure out, okay, well, who wants to see this and how much can we spend? And, that's too much or that's not enough. And we have to figure out how to make the thing happen for the right budget, for the right audience and possibilities. And I think that's going to be interesting to see how this continues to evolve. Do you predict a massive return to the cinemas once we sort of have the all clear, whenever that eventually is? I think that's post-vaccine, frankly, but do you see a big resurgence in attending and just like other social events? I think you'll be able to keep people away from sporting events and concerts and movies, once it's sort of safe to mix and mingle. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think first of all, we know that the movie companies are holding lots of films. They're they're waiting. So they're now going to be trying to figure out which ones to bring back in. And there's going to be a definite hunger for all the people stuck at home who just can't take another Netflix or Amazon Prime show.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they want to get out of the house. So there's got to be a lot of that pressure that's relieved. And, you know, I feel it myself. I mean, I'm going, what do you mean I can't go to the ArcLight? There's nothing to go see.
Yeah.
I miss the experience.
Sure.
So it will, of course, take, you know, event pictures, things to draw people. You know, they're not just going to go to see just anything, but there is, you know, a definite hunger for that experience, for getting out of the house for the weekend, you know, where you've been working all week and you want to do something with your family, with your kids. You know, all of that is still going to be operative. I was going to talk about one of the things that we've in this merging of TV and film is what's happening with, you know, with directors who are used to working in a more independent media like film, now coming into the parts of television like episodic television, where they're suddenly into a political nightmare of they are no longer at the top of the food chain,
Mm-hmm.
the top of the totem pole. They are way down the line.
Yeah.
And so in the second edition of my book, which is being published in September, it's all about a director's guide to survival, of how to survive television, and how not to ruin your career by going in thinking that you can be, you know, Spielberg in the world of television without a lot of kind of careful stepping over through the minefields.
Yes.
Because the world of episodic television is laden with minefields.
Your book on directing, this, which is coming out, and I've been lucky to read it in galleys, courtesy of our friends at Michael Weesey Productions, which I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I don't just say that because you're the guest. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed it. And whether it's the stories from the films that I know about or your history, which I didn't know about. And what I really liked was so many books that are from someone who is of an emeritus status and has the history that you do. Very often it's just war stories about these projects. And it's sort of like really a memoir. And those can be great. If that's what you want to read, that's great. But there are I mean, you use your war stories sparingly and really surgically was my take on it, where you'll reference something and occasionally you will tell a longer story that's really kind of interesting and adds a lot of perspective on why we're talking about it. But you're really using it to make broader points. And you have had this history, you know, you've been teaching and writing, as you mentioned at Chapman, you know, teaching filmmaking to the younger generations. And that was that aspect of on directing. That was especially the new piece about television and the world of television. I thought that was really just really on point and helpful. And I believe that's going to be a really big differentiator. And so I'll put a link. I guess people can pre-order that book online right now, I believe, through Amazon and the other usual outlets. But what did it teach you? Second to last question. What did the process between teaching filmmaking and having to, because I've taught filmmaking and producing myself, and I understand what it did for me was it made me critically examine everything I thought I knew. Now, you know a lot more than I do, but I can relate to the process. And everybody I've talked to who's also taught, who's been a practitioner and is also now teaching, has gone through that, where they've had to kind of re-examine, you know, their assumptions. And then there's some bright student who comes up with a question that actually, wow, I've actually haven't thought of that. Or that's an interesting take on that. What has it sort of taught you, and what about writing the book and really codifying your thinking What were some of the most revelatory aspects of that process, both teaching and or putting it into the form to share with people? What for you, what were the sort of the biggest benefits or revelations for you?
So as a teacher, learning from having to explain ideas to other people, having to articulate things that maybe I had done intuitively is a great process. I mean, I think I'm a much better director for having had to teach people and articulate these ideas to get them across and not just kind of fly by the seat of my pants. Mm-hmm. The things that we have to emphasize the most in our film school at Chapman is not only story and how to tell a story, but how to deal with your actors. Mm-hmm. Because the one thing our students are almost universally good at is using any cameras, lighting, microphones, sound equipment.
All the technical stuff. It's second nature to them.
Got that.
They grew up with an iPhone or something.
They're just way ahead.
Yeah.
Yes, and of course, so much is being shot on iPhones, which is even simpler. But they're way ahead technically. Right. What they're not ahead on is dealing with human beings who are just really annoying because they have opinions.
Yeah.
And they don't do exactly what you tell them to do.
Yeah.
And stories, as we know, stories and scripts are even harder. Those are, if you don't have that right, then all the rest kind of is for naught. But I emphasize, because I'm teaching directing, working with actors a lot. And that's what my two books are about is, how do you deal with actors? How do you, as a young director, even an experienced director? And one of the big things about it, one of the nice things is it's a never-ending learning experience. It's a lifelong, till the day they nail you in the box.
Yeah.
You're still learning about actors.
Right.
The cameras and stuff like that, you may have a pretty good handle on for a long time. But what keeps it interesting for all of us is, the actor is always giving you new challenges. The new material is giving you new challenges. You're not just doing the same thing every day. You're not just putting the same wheel on the same model of Chevrolet.
Mm-hmm. Well, you actually threw in several things. My last question before I have to let you go is, what are some of the best lessons you've learned about filmmaking that you could share with the audience? And we have a general audience, and then we also have a fairly nice, I know from the feedback and whatnot, that we have a fairly sizable chunk of people who are really interested, they're in the entertainment industry, or they're trying to be, or they want to be, or they're just passionate about learning more. So you can be as nerdy as you like, and speak, preach to the choir if you wish to. But what are some of those best lessons you might, what are a couple of like your 2 or 3 greatest hits of like, this is a nugget that you wish everybody, something you wish you knew maybe when you started, if you could go back and tell, 20s or 30s John, this thing about directing, or this thing about, just being in the industry, and this thing about having a life outside of the industry is great for everybody, for instance. But what's your take on that?
Wow. I can't tell you how much you have just put on me.
Do the smallest, simplest version of that you can give us one little fortune cookie if you have one. But what's your take on that?
Well, I am such a great believer in collaboration all the way up and down the line. I'm not a believer in the auteur theory. Yes. I think it works for some people, but for most of us, it's such a collaborative enterprise. And one of the hardest things is how to learn how to listen to all of your collaborators and know that even if you're as bright as our best directors, think of 2 or 3 of the best ones that we have. Even if you're as good as them, you still profit from being open to ideas and not being the Lone Ranger here. That's the greatest lesson you can learn. And as a young director, starting out at the beginning, it's very hard because you're terrified that everybody's going to know you're a fraud.
Sure.
And that, so you have to be very definitive and very, no, this is the way I want it. But you learn pretty quickly, you've got to open up. You can't just stand on that or you wind up failing miserably.
Yeah.
Because it's such directing is really hard to be good. So I don't know. That's the best I can give you as a quick.
Sure. Well, let me ask you this before I say goodbye then, and that's a great answer. This builds on that. What's the most satisfying part of directing for you?
It's working in the process. It's the process of filming, the preparation and the shooting and the post-production. That's where is the most satisfying. And of those three, the most satisfying is the shooting for me. Some people hate that part. Hitchcock hated that part of it.
Yeah.
He liked the preparing and the ending and the putting it together. But for me, putting a scene together, shooting it on the floor, working with the actors, working with the DP, going home at the end of the day knowing, what you've got, hoping it's going to be all right, worrying, showing up the next morning terrified about what you're going to do that day.
Right.
As long as I've been doing it, I'm always scared to death in the morning when I show up on the set.
Really?
Is this going to work?
You still have that?
Is this idea?
That first day of school kind of thing?
Absolutely. And I think that maybe if I didn't have that kind of feeling, I might be lazy.
Yeah.
I might not be caring enough, but you have to care because in your heart of hearts that what you shoot that day is going to be on film forever.
No pressure.
It's always it's not like a matinee that went badly on a production of a play where you say, well, I'll straighten that out tonight. We'll do better tonight. But with the film, bang, and there it is. So that's very inspiring.
Well, John, this has been honestly an inspiring talk for me. Really appreciate your time, and I wish we could go for hours and hours, and hopefully you'll join me again closer to the release of the book. Maybe we'll do a round two. But thank you so much for your time today. I hope you're safe and well, and it's good to see you.
Yes, Brendan, and let's look for happier times.
Agreed. Thank you, sir.